I know that many of you would like to ask some questions of our panelists here. And with 6 panelists, there's a lot of potential questions, a lot of issues. So what I'd like to ask you to do is ensure that your question is very clear and focused, and something that doesn't entail a huge sort of preamble before you actually get to the question. And I'll collect a number of these, and I'll make a list here. And after 3 or 4, then I'll turn things over to the relevant panel members who feel they're the ones who should answer those respective questions. So the floor is yours. Carla.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I can do that. That Welsh brewery looks to me like it is an example that we need to learn from, and I suspect that some of the others you brought up as well. We're at a place now where we can, with the interest and the energy in the locals and in the unions at a higher level of organization, we can begin to do some of the things that you guys are already doing. How can we get you to help us on an ongoing basis?
I'll keep that question. I haven't forgotten it, and we'll take several more, and then we can go back to the panel. Okay.
Who is responsible in editing the environmental...
There's a microphone, sorry.
Thank you. Who is responsible in adding the environmental, can I say, clause into the trade union, into the trade, deals? Yeah, so who's responsible? Like, I want to know, like, is it the president? Who is involved in that? Thank you.
Okay. The third question?
First of all, I want to thank the panel and all of you for your wonderful contributions. And I want to ask, is all of this going to be online? I teach about environmental and ecosystem health to graduate students at U of T, and I would love to be able to pass this information on. So that was a question that I wanted to ask. And Gordon Ilaxer, I wanted to ask you, how do you see your suggestion of not having refineries and petrochemical plants for the refining that some of the others want to do with the Canadian oil? I produced a film called Toxic Trespass on Children's Health and the Environment. We have a whole section with the Aamjiwnaang, the native people of Sarnia, who are surrounded by petrochemical plants and refineries. The health impacts are drastic. So if we want to have more cancer valleys in Canada, that's what that's going to lead to. So I would like you to explain how you think that could happen. I also want to thank that we have 2 wonderful young women speaking on this panel, and we need to encourage more young women to speak out and do the kind of work that you're doing. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll now turn to the panelists. Sarah, I believe a question was targeted at you about the Welsh brewery, so perhaps you want to elaborate a little bit on that, please.
Yeah, I have to say, it's made me laugh because I'm sat here and there's a cup here that says Cameron's Brewing Company. I don't know if we should go and work in the pub. How can I help? Well, I mean, one of the things that was really crucial to the project that we ran was that we didn't keep everything that we learned to ourselves. So while I was organising a central project at TUC, which aimed to identify 10 to 15 projects, working really intensively with those to try and reduce their impact on the environment, we identified over 20 in the end, but at the end I could only work with 7, over a 2-year period. So it was really important to share the information that we have as widely as possible. And I think that's why there was all this momentum building, was because I just told everybody what we were doing, and so did everybody else in the TUC. We just really put it out there. We had regular workshops, regular conferences, newsletters, built up the website. And I mean, when I started in the role, we were thinking it's really hard to find examples in particular sectors. And when I came back to look at how to put this presentation together and how to choose which projects to tell you about, I couldn't believe it. There was such a wealth. And so I think the opportunities are all there for you to do the same thing here. And I'm more than happy to share any expertise or any knowledge that I've got with just about anybody, because it's the opportunity to make a difference, and how often do we get that chance, really? So, Carla, wherever you are, I'll talk to you all weekend.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. The second question was who is responsible for negotiating the climate clauses in trade agreements, and I think that's something that Larry might be the most obvious person to ask about this, but maybe Bruce wants to have a crack at it as well.
Well, John, you asked about how many times climate change is mentioned in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The text fails to even mention the words climate change or the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the treaty everybody's... What they do mention is, and not to denigrate this at all, but it's not sort of the only thing you would think would be mentioned. They do mention the obligations under the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. Climate change they don't mention, but this is the only real climate change treaty that they do reference and incorporate into the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It is argued that that's not necessarily the only thing they should have talked about, or maybe not even the most important. So, how does that happen? I've actually seen the process. I've been in a lot of different environments where trade deals are negotiated. And what happens is the governments will come to people like me and claim that they're consulting, and what they do is they tell us what they're doing. I don't think they've read the dictionary definition of consulting lately, because that seems to be what they think it means, which is they explain to us what they're up to, and then they get on the elevator and go up to the real decision-making floors with all of the corporate leaders, and they get together and they actually decide the agenda. It got so bad in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement in the United States, congresspeople were not allowed to see the negotiating text. And the only ones that could see it were the 500 corporate lobbyists that were lobbying on behalf of the 500 largest corporations in the U.S. The Congress got so mad about that they insisted they at least have the right to see it, so they developed a room somewhere in the big Capitol building. Congress people could go in if they gave up their pens and their cell phones, and if they signed an agreement saying that they wouldn't tell anybody what they saw after they came out. But meanwhile, the corporate sector was in there giving advice to U.S. trade all the way through this. So practically speaking, these trade deals are by and for the corporate sector, and the governments are just playing the role as the servants of the corporations.
I just add briefly, given what you said about trade deals, I think it's all the more incumbent upon the negotiators at Paris to include explicit carve-outs, explicit exclusions for all climate actions by the signatories to Paris, from most notably ISDS. Because otherwise they will just use those provisions, and we've seen it in Canada. A couple of cases have already been mentioned. There are more, and so I think this would be an incredibly important signal that what's negotiated in Paris supersedes these gazillions of treaties with these ISDS provisions and mechanisms in them.
Thank you very much, Bruce. In terms of the recording, I think that there is some recording of this going on, but it's not something that we've finalized at this point, and I think we have to ask permission of all the panelists if they would agree that what they've said would be part of a program or a video of this presentation. So that process still has to happen, but obviously if it does, it'll be online and you'll be able to see it at the I assume it'll be at the W3 website. The last question was targeted at Gordon Latzer. And it's how do you see the process of dealing with these refineries?
Yes, I agree with you entirely that the refineries, if they're built and upgraders, will have these toxic effects, and I'm totally with the Native people who are in the Sarnia in that fight. We really have to get to the trade unionists and the NDP government in Alberta, and even it's interesting, the federal Green Party, Elizabeth May, even supports these refineries and upgraders. I can tell you that the emotion about it can be quite strong. I actually predicted the Alberta election 6 days before I got myself out there, but I was snubbed by one of the main leaders of the NDP because I had changed my position on this issue. He pretended he didn't know me anymore. And I think that the unions, especially, there was the Canadian Energy and Paper Workers Union, which is now a section of Unifor, along with the auto workers, was very strong in pushing for this and getting jobs and protecting, and getting jobs. And that has influenced the trade union movement in Canada and even the federal NDP. And we have to do our utmost to change people's minds. I think these governments, the NDP government in Alberta, is influenceable. Big Oil does not want to build more refineries. It's obviously much more economic for them to take oil from Canada and send it to their refineries they already have in Texas. But, they're not going to want to build them. So who's going to build them? Is the Alberta government going to build it? It's in deficit. We don't need more refineries in Canada. We have enough refineries for the amount of oil that we consume as Canadians. We're going to actually have to scale back because we're going to have to cut back the incredible wasteful use of oil we do in this country. So, we're going to have to go out there and do some persuading.
Thanks. Right. Okay. I think we have got time for a couple more questions, and I see a hand up over here. Again, I'll take a couple, and then I'll ask the panel to respond.
Hi. Great. It was really wonderful to hear you all speak. I just wanted to say to Warren, I like your numbers. Being a past employee of Ecology Ottawa, we found that Ottawa's biggest emissions were from housing and buildings. So 58% of the emissions come from that. So that when we're hounding the city to do particular things, to meet the targets that they created, that we always are talking about how they can make changes in that area. And the next one down was transportation. So we have a huge complete streets program, as does Toronto, and trying to kind of rebuild what transportation looks like in Ottawa. And I think there's lots of opportunity for municipal governments to do more around climate change. But I wanted to ask Gordon and anybody else, if we removed subsidies to the tar sands and we put regulations on the tar sands on how they, to produce greener, and we enforce those regulations, does anybody have a sense of whether it would just become too expensive to produce them? Whether, that doesn't become a viable option to extract bitumen?
Gordon?
Yeah, I think the first move the government should do in phasing out the sands is to bring in really tough regulations that apply to all energy sectors and say, you must meet these standards and you've got this amount of time to do it, and if you can't do it, we're going to have to phase you out. So the standards would be, for example, in oil, that you have to produce oil in the sands which doesn't produce more carbon in the production than in conventional non-fracked oil. You know what? They won't be able to do it because what you've got to do is you've got to extract bitumen. You know, 1 barrel of oil, they've got to use 2 tons of soil. So you get 1 bathtub of oil from that huge amount of earth, and they then have to heat it up. So how are they going to do that? And they use incredible amount of carbon fuels to do that. So I think if you bring in really tough environmental regulations, you give them a very short time frame to start working on it. If they can't, so that's the first action you tell Canadians. Canadians know about that. And then you see that these are the bad guys who are not living up to the regulations, but you apply it to, you know, electricity, you apply it to everybody else, so it doesn't look like it's unfairly applied to the sands themselves. And of course, we do have to eliminate the subsidies, but we'll have to, as Bruce said, you know, what is a subsidy? And we'll see whether the Trudeau government is, you know, will actually have a broad definition, and we've got to make sure that they do and cut out all of those subsidies.
Okay, thank you. I've been told that the reception is just behind us there in the next room. And I know also that the panelists will be around, so some of you may have some further questions. I would suggest you try to buttonhole members of the panel at the reception and ask them what's on your mind. And finally, I would like to close by thanking every member of the panel for what I think was a very excellent set of presentations, a very stimulating one.